The desert wind was dry, unforgiving, like the pressure mounting in Ibrahim Traoré's chest. He stood tall at the balcony of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, staring at the fading horizon, knowing that the sun was setting on more than just the day, it was setting on an era of submission. An era he had sworn to end. The Americans had sent a warning. Not in words, but in air pressure, in the roar of engines, in the shadows of fighter jets seen too close to Burkinabe skies. The message was clear: fall in line or fall altogether. Traoré's fingers tightened around the railing. His face stoic. But beneath the calm, calculations raced. Washington thought Burkina Faso could be bullied, that a small West African nation bold enough to throw off colonial chains and Western military bases, would cower when confronted by jets that could level cities. But they did not understand the heart of Africa. They underestimated a soldier who had crawled through gunfire and revolution to reach this very place. His defense chief, Colonel Sari, stormed in without announcement. President, U.S. aircraft, 2 F-35s, have entered the edge of our airspace. No permission. No declaration. They're testing us. Traoré didn't flinch. His jaw remained set. Tell me their altitude. 38,000 feet. Moving slow. Controlled. They want us to react emotionally, Traoré murmured. They want to draw first blood so they can justify the storm. Colonel Sari stepped closer. Permission to scramble our Mirage jets, sir. No, Traoré said firmly. We don't play their game. Not yet. He turned, his voice cold as steel. Initiate Plan Cum. Send the signal. The colonel blinked. Plan Cum was not public. It was not even whispered about. It was a classified protocol, a last resort, one that would bring in an unexpected hand. Sari hesitated only a second. Yes, Mr. President. Across the globe, in a winter-gray Kremlin office in Moscow, President Vladimir Putin leaned forward as a discreet line buzzed. He recognized the encryption signature immediately. Burkina Faso's president. The African lion who dared to defy NATO. He took the call with the stillness of a chess master. So, it begins. The desert wind carried more than dust that evening. It carried tension. It carried resolve. And somewhere above it, slicing silently through Burkinabe skies, 2 American F-35 fighter jets hovered like vultures circling prey they thought too weak to fight back. But they didn't know Traoré. Inside the marble-walled presidential war room, the air was electric. Giant screens displayed real-time satellite tracking of the intruding jets. Military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and diplomatic aides all stood like statues, awaiting the next command from the one man whose silence spoke louder than any general's bark. President Ibrahim Traoré stood before the largest screen, his eyes locked on the flight path. 2 red dots moved slowly, arrogantly, brushing the edge of Burkinabe airspace like a taunt. They knew Burkina Faso's defenses were limited. They thought the mere presence of American hardware would send Traoré crawling to the nearest embassy, asking for forgiveness. But he didn't flinch. Not once. Where is the French embassy's military attaché? Traoré asked, voice low but sharp as a blade. In the city, responded Defense Minister Colonel Sari. They've gone radio silent since this morning. Because they knew what was coming. Sari's face tightened. Are we sure this is America's move? Not a French proxy? Traoré turned to face the room. France lost their grip on us the moment we exposed their games. This is Washington now. A new hand. Same old arrogance. He motioned to his aide. Get me President Putin. Secure line. The room stiffened. It was one thing to cut off French influence. It was another to call Moscow. But Traoré had seen enough betrayal to know that in geopolitics, loyalty was an illusion. Only interests endured. As the line encrypted and connected, Traoré's heart beat with clarity. He knew the risks. The West would scream Russian puppet. They already had. But the truth was simpler. He would ally with anyone who respected African sovereignty, and punish anyone who didn't. A cold, calculated voice answered. Ibrahim, said Vladimir Putin. I wondered how long it would take. Traoré didn't waste time. 2 F-35s are flying over my house, Vladimir. I didn't invite them. I see them, Putin said dryly. They're being tracked from Kaliningrad. The Americans are probing. They do this before every strike. I need deterrence, Traoré said. No. Not speeches. Not UN statements. I need something they will feel. There was a pause. Long enough to taste. You're activating Plan Cum? Yes. Then I will deploy the Vimpel. 30 minutes. High-altitude intercept course. No broadcast. Traoré nodded. Merci. History will remember this moment, Putin said before the line cut. The Russian aircraft, a MiG-31 armed with our 37 hypersonic missiles, took off from a base in northern Algeria under radar silence. It carried no flags, no markings. It was a ghost, fast, quiet, and deadly. It wouldn't cross into Burkinabe airspace, but it didn't need to. Its range was enough to kiss the tail of any F-35 within 1,000 kilometers. Inside the war room, tension remained thick. Will Putin really intervene? One of the diplomats whispered. Traoré overheard and turned sharply. You think because we are African no one will back us? You think strength comes only from white houses and blue flags? The diplomat fell silent. You forget, Traoré continued, stepping forward. We are the descendants of Sankara, of warriors who fought with bare hands and beat steel. We don't need the world's permission to defend our soil. In Washington, General Mason stared at the satellite feed. The F-35s were approaching the Burkinabe border. But something had changed. A Russian signature, faint, erratic, appeared west of Niger. High speed. High altitude. No transponder. Sir, said the analyst, we have a bogey. Could be Russian. Possibly a MiG-31. They're not answering hails. Mason leaned forward. They're bluffing. This African president is playing poker with no cards. Or, said the analyst cautiously, he has Russia on speed dial. Mason didn't like where this was going. Recall the F-35s. Now. But. Now. It was too late. The Russian MiG-31 broke through Mach 2.5, soaring above the clouds like a dagger through silk. The pilot locked radar on the F-35s not to fire, but to let them feel it. A simple, brutal message. Asterisk, you are being watched. You are within range. One twitch and you're ash. Asterisk. The American jets, thousands of feet below, received the warning. Instantly their threat system screamed. Lock on. Multiple signals. One voice, unspoken but clear, back off. They peeled away in silence, tails toward Burkina Faso, humiliated and outmaneuvered by a ghost. In Ouagadougou, cheers erupted inside the war room. They're retreating. The screens confirmed it, the red dots were turning back. Traoré stood unmoved, though a faint breath escaped his lips. Relief? No. Calculation. The battle was only beginning. He turned to Colonel Sari. Prepare the nation. Address at midnight. Broadcast on all channels. Yes, President. Traoré walked to his private chamber, the weight of leadership pressing hard. But in his eyes, fire. Burkina Faso had stared down giants. And for once the giant blinked. The whole nation was awake. Flickering TVs in village huts. Plasma screens in city cafes. Soldiers crowding radios in military outposts. All waiting for the man who had dared to roar at empires. Traoré stood before the cameras, his uniform immaculate, his voice deliberate. My people, today we have witnessed the true face of modern colonialism. Not through words, but through warplanes. He paused. The silence made every heartbeat louder. They came into our skies to intimidate, to remind us of their power. But they forgot something. He leaned in. We are not afraid. Applause erupted across the land. Women ululated in villages. Young men raised fists. Even elders who had seen the rise and fall of leaders stood in silent awe. They sent jets. We sent a message. We will defend our skies, our soil, our sovereignty, with or without approval from foreign capitals. He raised his right hand. To the African who thinks his voice is small, know this. Today Burkina Faso forced America to blink. Across the Atlantic the backlash was swift. In the Pentagon debates turned to shouting matches. How did a small West African nation coordinate with Moscow so quickly? Who leaked the air path? Why didn't the F-35s engage? One senator growled, you let an African junta call Russia and humiliate the United States. Back in the White House, the National Security Council convened an emergency session. Sanctions were proposed. Accusations hurled. But the one word they all avoided was defeat. Because admitting it, even in whispers, meant the balance of power was shifting. In secret corridors of Langley, CIA analysts scrambled to decode how deep the Moscow-Ouagadougou axis truly went. But what no one in Washington yet realized was that this was only step one. Traoré wasn't just protecting airspace. He was preparing to redraw the map of power in Africa, and this time the ink would be African blood, not Western contracts. The sun rose heavy and red over Ouagadougou the next day, but sleep had not visited the presidential compound. Traoré paced across his private office, lit only by the soft amber of a brass lamp. Outside, crowds were already gathering at the gates, waving flags, chanting his name and calling him a lion, Le Lion de l'Afrique. But he wasn't basking in pride. He was planning the next move. The Americans had backed off. For now. But he knew better than to believe that meant peace. The empire never forgave embarrassment. Especially not when delivered by a black man who refused to kneel. Colonel Sari entered, boots echoing. "They're regrouping," he said. Traoré turned. "Where?" "The Gulf of Guinea. A carrier group. USS Roosevelt." Traoré's jaw tightened. "So they want to show teeth now?" "Teeth but no bite yet. They're still rattled by last night." Traoré smiled faintly. "Then we keep rattling them. Send a delegation to Mali and Niger." Quietly. "Same message, the time has come." Sari hesitated. "To form the alliance?" "Yes. Not just in spirit. On paper. With strategy. Weapons. Satellites. Troop sharing. It's time the world knew we are more than slogans." Sari gave a low whistle. "They'll call it a Russian puppet alliance." "Let them scream," Traoré replied. "Every move we make in self-defense they call it aggression. But when they fly jets over our homes they call it diplomacy." He sat down, eyes locked on the map of Africa. His finger traced a line from Burkina Faso to Mali, down to Niger, looping across Guinea and to the Central African Republic. The old French belt, once called Francafrique, now burning with resistance. They colonized us together. We'll liberate together. In Washington, panic began wearing a suit. Inside the CIA's Langley headquarters, Director Palmer barked at the map on the wall, jabbing at the satellite feed like a man trying to scratch away truth. "I want to know how this man built that kind of coordination with Russia. Who gave him access to Russian missile radar? Who trained his intercept protocols?" An analyst hesitated. "Sir, we believe the coordination didn't come through embassies. It came directly from a black channel in Moscow. Possibly via Wagner holdouts or private Russian military contractors embedded through Algeria." Palmer spat. "Wagner's supposed to be dismantled." The analyst gave a dry nod. "So was the USSR." Palmer sat, frustrated. "This isn't just about Burkina Faso. It's about the damn narrative." Traoré just made himself a global symbol. Twitter's exploding. TikTok's painting him as the new Che Guevara. Even American kids are posting his speech in English. They all knew the truth. One jet retreating was bad enough. But millions seeing it, celebrating it, that was catastrophic. We need options. Pressure points. Family. Food. Finance. We either bring him to heel, or make him an example. Back in Burkina Faso, the streets were overflowing with color. 1,000 drummers filled the capital. Women wrapped in patterned wax print cloth threw flowers at military trucks. Young boys painted their faces red and gold and danced in the dust. But deep in the military barracks, something more serious was brewing. 3 generals sat in a closed room, each with a glass of tea. Each carried scars from decades of coups, alliances and betrayals. And each understood what Traoré's victory meant, not just for him but for the whole balance of power within the armed forces. General Benu, the oldest, sipped his tea slowly. "The Americans won't attack us with bombs. Not yet. They'll attack with cash. Promises. Divide and rule." General Diallo nodded. "Traoré's strength lies in unity. That's where we must shield him." But the third general, Ouedraogo, was less convinced. "He's rising too fast. No African leader humiliates America and survives the year. They'll come for him. And when they do, they won't come through the sky. They'll come through us." The others turned sharply. Benu narrowed his eyes. "You suggesting a coup?" Ouedraogo leaned back. "I'm suggesting we be prepared for when the music changes. Today he's the lion. Tomorrow he might be the bait." Silence. Outside the people danced. Inside the storm gathered. In Moscow, Putin watched the footage of Traoré's midnight speech again. It played on loop, the moment Traoré said, "We are not afraid." Putin sipped his tea, nodding slightly. "Africans used to be students," he murmured. "Now, they're teachers." His advisor entered the room. "The Americans are sending CIA assets to Togo and Ghana. They're triangulating him. Political infiltration. NGOs. Some media operations." Putin stood slowly. "Then we must move faster. Give Traoré the tools. Communications tech. Radar jammers. Drones. Don't label them Russian. Let them fly Burkinabe colors. The world must believe he built it all himself." The advisor raised an eyebrow. "Why the subtlety?" "Because this isn't just about jets," Putin said. "It's about ideology. If they think he's just our puppet, he's a threat. But if they believe he is his own force, he becomes a revolution. 3 nights later, an American journalist named Craig Winston snuck into Burkina Faso. He came under the cover of night, dressed like a French tourist, entering through the Guinean border on a diplomatic pretext. His job wasn't to report, it was to assess. Probe. Poke. He got as far as the eastern edge of Ouagadougou before they caught him. Burkinabe intelligence arrested him outside a small hotel, his camera filled with photos of military positions. But instead of hiding it, Traoré made a public statement. "Let the world see," he said to the cameras. "They say we're paranoid. But their spies are already here." He didn't torture Winston. Didn't jail him. He fed him, gave him his equipment back, and escorted him to the border with a warning. "Next time," he said, "come with a notebook. Not a lens." Back in America, that made headlines. Burkinabe leader outplays US again, releases spy, peacefully. Traoré's approval skyrocketed not just in Africa, but globally. Young revolutionaries in South America and Asia began quoting him. Protests erupted in Paris, calling him the voice of post-colonial dignity. But with popularity came danger. And the vultures in his own skies were beginning to circle, not with missiles but ambition. Inside the presidential palace, Traoré's most trusted advisor, Mariam Cabaret, stepped in without knocking. "Something's off," she said. He looked up. 4 junior officers met last night. Secretly. No logs. No clearance. Names? She handed him a paper. Traoré scanned them. "Captain Issoufou. I trained him myself. That's why it's dangerous." Traoré sighed. "They won't move until they see weakness. Until they think I've overplayed my hand. Then don't give them that chance." Traoré stood, walked to the balcony and stared out at the crowd. "They don't understand yet," he murmured. "This isn't about power. It's about destiny." He looked at Mariam. "Prepare a national speech. 1 week from now. Not in the palace. In the streets. Among the people." Mariam nodded. "If they want to see where my power comes from," Traoré said, "let them stand where I stand." The crowd stretched farther than the eye could see. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, packed the wide expanse of Place de la Révolution in the heart of Ouagadougou. Mothers with babies tied to their backs. Elders sitting on wooden stools beneath cloth umbrellas. Youths with painted faces and raised fists. Soldiers in full fatigue standing shoulder to shoulder with market traders, students and artisans. Ibrahim Traoré stood not above them, but among them. A simple black military shirt, no medals, no show of rank. Just a microphone. Just a voice. Behind him, no flags of foreign powers. Only one banner hung high: "Africa will not kneel." He raised the mic. "Brothers, sisters, children of Sankara, children of Lumumba, I come to you not as a ruler, but as your son." The crowd roared. "We are surrounded by those who fear our independence, who pretend to offer aid while stealing our gold, our dignity, our very breath. Last week their jets came to intimidate us. They came thinking they would see fear. But they saw a people already free." More roars. "They say I am a Russian puppet. But who controls a people who choose to stand? No one. Not Russia. Not France. Not America. Only the people of Burkina Faso." Drums boomed through the crowd. "I do not speak today to promise peace. I speak to promise truth. And the truth is this: we are in a war for our soul. Not a war of bullets. A war of identity. A war against the idea that we must bow to be safe." He paused. "If I must fall, let me fall standing with you. But I will not run. I will not bow. And I will not sell my people for their applause." The crowd erupted. What began as a speech became an earthquake. Hours later, the speech aired on Al Jazeera, RT, even underground media platforms in Latin America and Asia. In Washington it was a PR nightmare. State Department officials scrambled. Western media tried to spin it. Traoré risks African stability with populist grandstanding. But the truth couldn't be stuffed back into the bottle. This wasn't just Burkina Faso anymore. It was a blueprint. And someone, somewhere, wanted to destroy it. A week later, a meeting took place in a quiet hotel room in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. The attendees wore plain clothes. No insignias. But their tongues carried weight. French intelligence officers. 2 American contractors. 1 Guinean fixer. And a Burkinabe trader, a young colonel named Issoufou, face cloaked in shame and ambition. "Traoré has gone too far," one Frenchman said. "He's made France look weak. Made the Americans back down. If he remains, your region will be unrecognizable in 6 months. Isufu shifted. And if I move against him? You'll be seen as a stabilizer. You'll have support. Quietly but decisively. Financial, logistical. Media too. Isufu nodded slowly. And the people? The American smirked. People forget fast when their leaders die fast. Back in Ouagadougou, Colonel Sari intercepted the plot. He burst into Traoré's office, a flash drive in hand. You need to see this. Traoré plugged it in. Audio recordings filled the room, Isufu pledging loyalty to the French. Maps. Routes. Plans to seize the radio station. Disable comms. A dawn strike at the presidential residence. Traoré sat in silence. Finally he looked up. How many are involved? 4 officers. 20 men. All under Isufu's direct command. Traoré nodded. Then we let them. Sari blinked. Sir? We let them come. Let them strike. But we control the board. This time we catch the snake, not just the tail. At 3:42 a.m. the coup began. Isufu and his men breached the first checkpoint. 2 guards defected. A third was silenced. They moved like ghosts, weapons drawn, heading for the presidential wing. What they didn't know, they were being watched. Every hallway had hidden cameras. Every step triggered silent alerts. The traitors thought they were hunting, but they were the ones being hunted. As Isufu approached the final corridor, ready to breach the presidential door, the lights cut out. Then floodlights snapped on. Dozens of soldiers surrounded them, weapons raised. Colonel Sari stepped forward. Traitors of the Republic, he said calmly, you are surrounded. Isufu froze. His men hesitated. Then behind Sari Traoré emerged. I gave you my trust, he said coldly. You sold it for a promise from ghosts. Isufu dropped to his knees. News of the failed coup broke before dawn. Traoré didn't gloat. He addressed the nation with composure and fire. We have defeated the cowards who would sell our future for 30 pieces of silver. Let this be a warning. We are no longer a nation of puppets. We are the authors of our destiny. He didn't execute Isufu. He tried him publicly. That, more than anything, infuriated the West. In Washington, a final meeting was called. This time the tone had changed. Director Palmer of the CIA sat across from a general of the Pentagon. He's too popular, Palmer said. Assassination will make him a martyr. Another Sankara. So what do? We starve him. Sanctions. Economic warfare. Cut off supply chains. Frame him for human rights abuses. Pressure the UN. Turn his allies against him. The general frowned. And if that fails? Palmer's eyes were cold. Then we crash the whole region. But Traoré wasn't sleeping. He was building. Every dollar they tried to cut he replaced with bartered trade. Russian oil for Burkinabe gold. Iranian tech for cotton exports. Chinese road contracts in exchange for uranium rights, but all transparent, on Burkinabe terms. He launched a digital currency, Afrocoin, for local transactions, reducing dependency on the CFA franc. He recruited young African coders, engineers, teachers. Built alliances with grassroots movements in Senegal, Guinea, Congo. Every week, his power grew not by fear but by inspiration. And somewhere above, satellites watched nervously. Because no one expected a soldier from West Africa to become the most dangerous idea in the world. A free black nation that refused to beg. In a shadowy command center in Germany, the scramble order came through. Eagle flight, launch immediately. Target is visual surveillance. Do not engage unless provoked. 2 F-35 stealth fighters lifted off from a NATO base. Fast, silent, sleek as knives in the sky. Their destination, West Africa. Their purpose, intimidation. In Ouagadougou the wind shifted. Colonel Sari received the alert from a sympathetic contact in Mali. 2 American fighters. High altitude. Headed straight for your airspace. Ibrahim Traoré stood on the balcony of the modest presidential villa. His boots planted firm, his eyes scanning the wide skies of his homeland. They think we'll tremble, he said. Sari asked, what's the response? Traoré picked up the red line phone. One number was dialed. Moscow. Seconds later a voice came through. Oh, Russian. Direct. To President Traoré. I need the favor you offered. Now. There was a pause. You will have your sky shield. In the Russian enclave of Tartus, Syria, a pair of Su-57 fighter jets roared to life. They were faster, hungrier, and manned by pilots trained in ruthless real-world scenarios. They did not fly low. They flew proud, a statement in themselves. Each carried missiles locked to U.S. fighter signatures. Each bore the symbol of a growing alliance, the African eagle beside the Russian bear. American jets approached Burkinabe airspace with confidence. Until the radar pinged. Bogies at 6 o'clock. High speed. Unknown ID. The American pilot's voice cracked slightly. Control, we've got inbound targets closing at Mach 1.8. Control responded. Hold course. Do not initiate contact unless fired upon. But the Russians weren't here to chat. They slid beside the F-35s wing to wing. One of them tilted slightly, exposing the payload under its belly. It wasn't subtle. It was a threat. The American pilot radioed back. Control, they've armed. Recommend fallback. This is escalation. Back in Washington, the Pentagon roared into chaos. What the hell is Putin thinking? A general barked. He's sending a message, a CIA analyst whispered. Traoré is not alone. Another general spat. We can't fire. Not unless we want World War III. So they did the only thing left. They backed down. The F-35s turned in the skies. Their radar signatures receded. No missiles were launched. No dogfights erupted. But across Africa the news went nuclear. American jets retreat from Burkinabe airspace. Putin's shadow shields Traoré. Africa is no longer a playground. Even countries that hadn't taken sides began to lean. Niger called for a summit. Mali pledged full cooperation. Guinea offered oil in exchange for defense agreements. The African lion was waking up. In Paris, French President Charles Renaud poured another drink. His hands shook. I told them, he murmured to his chief of staff. This man, this boy, would light a match under the whole continent. The staffer looked grim. Sir, there's talk of others following Traoré. Togo. Even Cameroon. The president's face turned pale. And if Africa turns east? Then the era of Francafrique is over. In the meantime, Traoré toured the provinces. He didn't arrive in convoys of SUVs. He rode in armored trucks, seated beside children, eating roasted maize, listening to the old women who cursed colonial days. He visited mines where foreign companies had exploited workers. He issued new licenses to local co-ops instead. He entered schools where textbooks were still printed in France. He tossed them out and launched a new African curriculum, history told by Africans. In every town the people rose to their feet. Not out of fear, but pride. Because for the first time they weren't just hearing change. They were touching it. But not all were pleased. Inside a vast villa in Ghana, billionaire corporate lobbyist Mark Dovington paced angrily. This dictator is ruining everything. He spoke into a satellite phone. You said he'd be gone months ago. Now he's got Putin flying over his skies and the whole continent watching. Do you realize how many contracts we're losing? Gold? Lithium? Oil? The voice on the line replied calmly. He's more than a man now. He's a movement. And movements are harder to kill. Dovington sneered. Then we don't kill the movement. We kill the dream. Inside the Kremlin, Putin sat with his top strategist. They reviewed footage of Traoré's speech. An assistant translated into Russian. Strong. Calculated. Charismatic. Putin's eyes didn't blink. He's a lion. But even lions can be led, if you feed them the right meat. The strategist raised an eyebrow. Do we control him? Putin smirked. No. But we do protect him. And that makes us kings in Africa once again. In a hidden lab in Switzerland, something darker was being prepared. Scientists, private contractors, manipulated a virus strain. Nothing too deadly. Just disruptive. Targeted. A whisper campaign began online. Strange illness in Burkina Faso. A few fake videos showed hospital scenes, patients coughing blood. Western outlets ran the headlines. Is Ouagadougou the next Wuhan? The goal was fear. The goal was isolation. But Traoré responded fast. He opened his hospitals to global inspectors. Brought in Cuban doctors. Showed every lab report to the public. In just 72 hours the lie collapsed. And this time it wasn't Traoré under attack. It was the system trying to stop him. And then he made his boldest move yet. Traoré stood before the African Union. Dressed in a plain white tunic, the map of Africa embroidered across his chest. My brothers and sisters, he began. For 60 years we have sat at tables set by others. We have eaten the scraps they left. We have smiled while our people starved. No more. He raised a single coin. Shiny. Gold. Stamped with a new emblem. This is the Pan-African dinar. Shock rippled through the room. It will be backed by real resources, gold, lithium, uranium, not promises. It will trade in Africa only. It will free us from the CFA, from the dollar, from control. Some leaders clapped. Others remained still. But all of them knew. The game had changed. Forever. Equals D. The ripples of change swept through the African continent. In the heart of the Congo, a group of miners stopped their work, listening to the news on an old, crackling radio. They heard about the Pan-African dinar, the promise of independence, and the bold move made by Traoré. They glanced at each other, unsure, but something in the air felt different. A sense of possibility, of hope that had long been absent. In Kenya, university students marched in the streets chanting slogans of unity, of African empowerment. The world had underestimated their strength, and now it was clear. Africa had a voice, and it was louder than ever. But not everyone was pleased with this new vision. Back in Paris, President Renault summoned his Security Council. They're all going to rally behind him. Not just Burkina Faso but the entire continent. This is the start of something bigger, the French foreign minister said with a hint of desperation in his voice. We've already lost the mineral contracts, the energy deals. This is an existential threat to the old order. Renault took a deep breath. If Africa rejects us, we lose everything. And if Putin is behind Traoré, we've got a two-front war. Economically, politically, and possibly militarily. A grim silence fell over the room. In Washington, D.C., the National Security Council convened in crisis mode. I don't care what we have to do. He's destabilizing an entire continent, a high-ranking official said, his voice shaking. We need to find a way to neutralize him. But we can't go to war with Russia. Not with everything else going on, the CIA director cautioned. We'll have to find other means. And what would that be? A general demanded. Sanctions? We've already seen those fail. Covert operations? We'll be seen as invaders. We're running out of options here. There was an awkward pause, then someone spoke up. There's always another way. In Moscow, Putin's strategy was playing out as expected. He knew that any African leader who openly challenged the West would eventually find themselves targeted. But Traoré had something more than just resilience. He had the fire of his people behind him, and now, a financial system that could potentially reshape the entire global economic order. Let them try, Putin murmured to his inner circle. This is just the beginning. The global stage trembled. As news of Traoré's moves spread across the world, other leaders in Africa followed suit. Sierra Leone and Liberia began considering the Pan-African dinar as a trade currency. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, debated it in secret meetings. Even South Africa, the continent's economic powerhouse, felt the weight of the shift and began to pull away from Western influence. But Traoré's greatest triumph was yet to come. In the heart of the African Union summit, he stood once more before the leaders of the continent. The room fell silent as he walked to the podium. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, a living embodiment of the hope that had been denied to generations of Africans. The day had arrived. I've been to the mining towns, the villages, the schools, Traoré began. I've walked the streets and heard your pain, your hopes, your dreams. We have all suffered under the weight of foreign exploitation. But no more. Today we take back what is rightfully ours. He raised his hand, revealing the new currency, the Pan-African dinar. The African Union leaders watched in awe as he continued. This is not just a coin. It's a declaration. A declaration of our independence. Of our unity. Africa's future is not for sale. He placed the coin on the podium with a firm thud, and the room erupted in applause. Elsewhere, deep in the corridors of power in Washington, the reaction was swift. There's no denying it now, the CIA chief muttered as he stared at the screen, watching Traoré's speech. He's won. The people love him. The President of the United States was on a call with European allies. We can't allow this. We can't let him control Africa. We have to act now before it's too late. But it was already too late. Traoré had gained the upper hand. His vision of a united, economically independent Africa was no longer a dream, it was a movement. The West, while scrambling to regain its influence, had underestimated the power of African unity. The continent had suffered for so long, and now they had someone who was ready to lead them into the future. The African Union voted overwhelmingly to adopt the Pan-African dinar. The CFA franc, a remnant of colonial influence, was soon abandoned by member states. Back in Burkina Faso, President Traoré stood before a crowd of thousands in the capital. The winds of change swept through the streets and the people, from the young to the elderly, stood together. For the first time in generations, there was no fear in their eyes. Only hope. It's not just about Africa's resources anymore, Traoré proclaimed. It's about our people, our dignity, our future. As the crowd cheered, he knew that this was just the beginning. Africa was no longer a playground for foreign powers. It was a force unto itself, united in strength and purpose. The world had changed forever. Africa's destiny was no longer in the hands of the West. The African leaders who had once been puppets in the global game were now the ones holding the strings. And in the distance, as the sun began to set over the savannah, President Ibrahim Traoré looked out across his country. His people had risen, and with their strength, he had become the symbol of their dreams. The forces that had once sought to divide and conquer them had underestimated the power of unity. And now the future was theirs.